Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at Donald Trump's pick for Secretary of State, a man who's spent his whole career out of university at Exxon, the energy giant. Rex Tillerson with us to talk about it from Jacksonville. She's penned a piece saying it was a good idea for Forbes magazine. Ellen Wald, welcome back to the show. I want to welcome back as well here in the studio Ann Kratz, historian of U.S. foreign policy, Justin Smith, academic and co-founder of After Trump, and André Lozekrug-Pietri, who is the founder of A Capital and spends a lot of his time between here and the Far East and watching Trump's policies or purported policies with particular interest. We want to welcome for part two of our discussion from Tampa, Florida, Republican strategist Rick Wilson. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
Rick, you are not a fan of this pick.
Well, look, I think that right now the constellation of advisors around Donald Trump is increasingly looking very, very, as if they were picked out by folks in the Kremlin, not by people looking out for America's best interests. And while I've still got a little bit of a wait and see on Tillerson, there are a lot of people who regard him highly. I do wonder if someone with such deep and extensive business ties in Russia and personal and business ties to Vladimir Putin is not already sort of inclined not to look at Vladimir Putin as somebody who is an adversary and an authoritarian and the head of basically a kleptocracy, but rather as somebody that he's getting the signals from Donald Trump that he thinks Putin is a more valuable ally, frankly, than a lot of our traditional allies in the NATO alliance.
Ann Kratz?
Well, yes, I mean, I think. Yes, I mean, it is annoying. Let us remember one thing. John McCain, not so long ago, was spending his birthday on the yacht of the Russian aluminum king, Mr. Diplomat. That was several years ago when everything was rosy with the Russians. I think if you're going to talk about the entire cabinet that Mr. Trump has chosen, there's some, as Hillary Clinton would name them, deplorables from all kinds of points of views. But I think our first order of business in the U.S. today should be to try and understand what has happened, what are the reasons for the election of a person like Donald Trump, and then work on it to eventually unseat him if we find out, how to do it. Let's give him, I'm sorry to have to say it, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. I think the appointment in question is raising eyebrows because of the connection with Putin. But look at the move he made yesterday, antagonizing China. So it seems to me Mr. Trump is trying to play it from all angles. And at this point, to discuss exactly and to even question the future patriotism of this Texan at the head of ExxonMobil is a bit much even for me.
It's premature.
It's premature, yes.
Lots of reactions on the hashtag F24debate. Trump has made some appointments that are downright absurd. Rex Tillerson isn't one of them. So that's someone who thinks that this was a good move. Now, Donald Trump, more broadly, when you're talking about Russia, there's another context right now. He's taking on all comers when it comes to CIA allegations of hacking during the presidential election campaign. We can show you what he tweeted on Monday. Can you imagine if the election results were the opposite and we tried to play the Russia CIA card? It would be called conspiracy theory. However, the head of the Senate, unimpressed, Republican Mitch McConnell, taking on the president-elect.
The Russians are not our friends. They invaded Crimea. Senator McCain and I and some of our Democratic friends met with a delegation from the Baltic countries just this past week to say that they're nervous about the Russians, to put it mildly.
Ellen Wald, let me ask you, ordinary Americans, when they see this argument taking place, what are they thinking?
I think they're thinking they'd really like to know. They'd really like to get to the bottom of it. There have been conflicting reports that, not quite every agency is on board with this. I think that people just want to know what happened. I don't think anyone objects to there being more probes into the issue because...
Well, Donald Trump does.
Well, Donald Trump would. That's his position, and he has every right to object to there being more probes. The issue is really, systems are being hacked. Who's doing it? Are they leaving? Are the tracks that they're leaving credible? I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but from what I understand, there are ways to make it look like somebody else did it. And these things need to be investigated, and appropriate security measures need to be taken. And I'm not surprised that Donald Trump is angry about people making these claims. That's his right to be angry about it. But it's also the right of the American public to want to know what happened.
Andrei Lozakrug-Petri, what's your reaction to all of this? And, we've had the same allegations, by the way, fears that there could be hacking ahead of the French elections next spring, and from Germany's domestic intelligence agency over the German elections that take place in the fall of 2017.
Yeah, well, if it was not that dramatic and the consequences of geopolitics could be dramatic, I think it's actually pretty amusing to see. I mean, remember this when Donald Trump suggested Nigel Farage as as the best possible ambassador to the UK at the moment where UK
ambassador
wanted
to the US, yeah.
UK ambassador to the US at the moment where the big topic in the UK is about taking back control. And here, this amazing movie in front of us where you have the impression that actually the sovereignty of the US, which we thought would be unattainable, is basically being at least challenged, giving the strong impression that there's meddling by the enemy or the not friend, as Mr. Mitchell is saying, Russia. So I'm amazed to see that people are elected for sovereignty reasons, for building up strong borders, and at the same time they give this impression that actually they lose a little bit control on their sovereignty. So this is a big interesting topic happening.
And Kratz, a mixed message.
Well, I think it's absolutely necessary that an investigation be conducted and that we get to the bottom of it. But my firm conviction is that whether or not the Russians have meddled with our election at the highest level, it isn't Putin that has made 60 million Americans vote for Trump. So, it's important to find out what went on, but it's ridiculous. I do use the word in full knowledge of what it means. It is ridiculous to think our democracy is so fragile that it can be swayed by, all kinds of rumors that Mr. Putin and his cronies would send around. And I find this grotesque.
Rick Wilson, point taken that Putin, at best, is a fly in the ointment?
Well, look, I think that the Russians have a history, not only in recent times, but obviously stretching quite far back, of attempting to use a sort of asymmetrical kind of warfare based on intelligence, deception, disinformation, and propaganda. And I think that it has a potentially a meaningful effect on the elections. I mean, it's interesting. Donald Trump thinks that 3 million illegal aliens who are, come up from south of the border to work in menial labor positions were able to conspire and vote, have 3 million of them vote for Hillary Clinton. But he doesn't believe the Russians could possibly, a nation state level actor could possibly have an effect on our elections. I find that a little bit of an interesting contrast. But I do believe that we're in a situation right now where for the good of the democracy and the good of the republic, we really need to ask these questions. We really need to look at this problem. We need to determine what's the level of motivation and why they're so motivated to support Donald Trump, what they've done, and the fact of the matter is the FBI is the one agency out of the 17 national intelligence services in the United States that is slow rolling this. Everyone else believes there's absolutely been Russian involvement, penetration, and manipulation, not only in the political sphere and in the hacking sphere, but there are concerns that they've penetrated U.S. voting systems. We don't know that. We haven't seen proof of that yet in the public domain. But it's worth asking if our national sovereignty is compromised by a foreign power. And frankly, if you're the president of the United States, you need to view Russia with clear eyes and not be starry-eyed over the fact that once upon a time Vladimir Putin flattered Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's been gushing like a fangirl about Putin ever since. So I think there's a lot of concerns here, and we do need to look into this for the sake of a transition that doesn't delegitimize the elections process in this country.
Rick Wilson, you're not holding back, and yet you're a Republican. You're from the same party as Donald Trump. What's the conversation like with fellow members of your party these days? Is it all-out war within the party?
There are three factions in the party right now. There are the folks who are completely over the moon in love with Donald Trump and absolutely going to, they could set themselves on fire if he asked them to do it. There's the faction that is in a wait-and-see mode, and they're terrified of what's happening because they're smarter people than the average bear, as I like to say. And there are folks who, like myself, have seen Trump as a guy who doesn't represent Republican or conservative values. From the very beginning of this process, folks like me have viewed Donald Trump as somebody who is not representative of the conservative movement, and frankly, his alliance and his obsequious posture towards Vladimir Putin and the Russian kleptocracy is something that concerns me in the foreign policy sphere, because he's aligning himself right now with a guy who's helping facilitate Assad's genocide in Syria. He is aligning himself with a guy who has annexed Crimea, invaded Ukraine, destabilized the eastern front of NATO, and I find this to be a remarkable development for a person who seeks to uphold American values. So that's why I'm direct about it. That's why I speak out about it. And I think there are the people that are around Donald Trump, Paul Manafort, Carter Page, Michael Flynn in particular. These guys aren't just pro-Russian. They seem to the point where they're putting the word and the interests of the Russian government ahead of the American intelligence community, and it's a shocking and remarkable development.
All right, we're going to talk about those people in particular. The last one you mentioned, the National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn. First, though, to remind viewers that there is still an outgoing president. His name is Barack Obama, and he was asked why he'd ordered a full review on the Russian hacking allegations when interviewed by the satirical program The Daily Show.
The reason that I have called for a review is really to just gather all the threads of the investigations, the intelligence work that has been done over many months, and put it in a single document that can be shared with members of Congress, relevant intelligence agencies. They can be shared with the transition team so that they understand what exactly happened.
Now, as for Trump himself, he told a Sunday talk show he's not going to be taking daily intelligence briefings when he's president.
Smart person. I don't have to be told the same thing and the same words every single day for the next 8 years. Could be 8 years, but 8 years. I don't need that. But I do say if something should change, let us know. Now, in the meantime, my generals are being briefed, and Mike Pence is being briefed.
Justin Smith, Trump saying, I'm an intelligent person. I don't need to hear the same thing every day for 8 years.
We haven't seen any evidence of it. He clearly needs to listen to other people. But I just wanted to say how delighted I am to hear Rick Wilson speaking, and I really think lucid Republicans of the third type he identified hold the hope for the future of the United States. I hope more people will come around within the Republican Party, and to me right now what's astounding is how the extent to which the current identity of the Republican Party was forged in the post-Cold War era with zero historical memory of the events that shaped that party under Reagan, for example. It's entirely disappeared and indeed flipped 180 degrees.
Ellen Walds, when you see that the National Security Advisor that Trump has picked, Michael Flynn, has had very close relationships with Moscow, again, it brings us back to this isn't exactly this sort of team of rivals that we'd been promised when the transition began.
Look, I'm not overly familiar with Michael Flynn's ties to Russia, but the point here really is that is America going to have a realist foreign policy when it comes to dealing with Russia? All of those events that you mentioned, Aleppo and Crimea, all of those things did not happen under Donald Trump's administration, and we really don't know where he's going to go with this. We do know he has said that he is not interested in engaging in, say, nation building or regime change. And so we can probably understand that he's not going to be trying to foment a revolution in Russia. And if you're not going to foment a revolution, then you've got to say, well, how can I deal with what is present? How can I deal with this guy who is manipulative and evil and runs a kleptocracy and all of those things? Yes, he does that. How can we deal with him, and how can we better pursue American interests in that atmosphere? And, you know, I don't know if the people he's surrounding himself with will be able to do that. I think that, you know, we're going to have to see. But I think that that's probably the goal.
Andre Lozakrog-Petri, your reaction to all this? Again, we're in this sort of transient phase.
Yeah, I mean, what's incredible, I would just like to react to the points which, I mean, we should not forget elections today. More and more, we live in a volatile world, more and more volatile, and I think elections also are more and more volatile until the last days. For Brexit, for the US, for a lot of polls, we don't know what's going to happen. So I actually don't buy, I buy your argument saying we should really think what happened to have 60 million Americans vote for Donald Trump. I think the point which was just made, indeed, the policy with Russia, with Crimea, with Syria is a huge failure of the Obama administration and also of the European, obviously. So that's a fact. But on the other side, I mean, when you see these little events like the files coming out about the Democratic Convention, showing how much it was twisted to the detriment of Bernie Sanders, for example, or the fact that the FBI investigation happened just a few days before. These might have been the couple of millions voters which went for Trump, and probably not for Trump, but against the system. So we need to think ourselves. And in France, it's the same story. We really need to think what has not worked, because otherwise the populists will come to power, not because people vote for the populists, but they vote against the system.
And we're confused because on the one hand, we're talking about doing deals when it comes to the case of Russia, and we're talking about putting up barriers when it comes to the likes of Mexico and China. So which way is it going?
Well, I think, you know, there's clearly a sentiment. And, you know, when there's this story about globalization, and I'm coming from business, too long the business world tried to promote trade, showing that trade is actually an accelerator of growth. But what we forgot is that actually it's very unbalanced and is more and more unbalanced. In the US, people who are under the, I mean, I was amazed to see that today 2/3 of Americans, if they need to have an emergency $500, I don't know, health bill or so, cannot afford that. They need to lend the money from somebody else. This is probably something that for some of the viewers is incredible. But if we don't understand that, we don't understand why you have the populists coming to power, and might very well come to power even in our countries where we were not able to have a much more inclusive society. And then you have these extremes coming to power, thinking that they can do better with doing deals. I'm convinced of the opposite. I think you need to still have strong vision, strong values, and not everything is deal making.
Now, Ann Kratz.
Well, I agree 100% with what you've just said. We need to have a new vision for the United States. We haven't had a vision for a while. We've been sort of floating around. The policy concerning China has really been a failure. You know, the containment of China has really worked against us rather than for us. And as far as Russia is concerned, it was left to...
Well, you say it's a failure, but we're doing... The whole world is doing more and more business with China. China's
well, that's why
being integrated into the world economy. Is it a failure?
That's why, in a sense, it's a failure, because the policy of containment was to try and sort of isolate China and make sure that it did not become a competitor to the United States, economically speaking. And I mean, that is...
I think it's isn't it win-win in this particular case, when you see, for instance, the naming of the Iowa governor who's done such great business with China as to be the ambassador to Beijing?
Right. Well, that was a good move on the part of Mr. Trump, one has to admit. That was a smart move on the part of Mr. Trump. And then the next minute, he goes and says that maybe he will no longer be married to the one China policy. But as I said, actually, on this program recently, basically, though, that policy of Trump antagonizing China has been the Obama policy for the last few years. So I don't think this is a subject to discuss tonight because it's too complicated and too big. But as I repeat, I think our main duty, not only Americans, but Europeans as well, and especially perhaps Europeans, who really actually today may have a chance to become the body of citizens who can somehow balance American extraordinary military and financial power. The Europeans now have that chance, and they should take it.
All right, that'll be a debate for another time. I want to thank you, Anne Kratz. I want to thank Andre Lozekrug Pietri. I also want to thank Justin Smith, Rick Wilson for joining us from Tampa, Florida, and Ellen Wald in Jacksonville, Florida. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next.
Thank you.
And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, François.
So what are you going to start with? Flip of the coin. Are you going to start with the pro-Tillerson crowd or the anti?
Maybe right down the middle, the people who are neutral. Okay. They don't exist, actually. But anyway, let's start with the Huffington Post. Moscow's mule. That's not neutral. So a lot of people concerned that Mr. Tillerson was a little bit too pally with Vladimir Putin at a certain point, and that could, I don't know, upset the apple cart somewhat. I like this tweet. Selecting Rex Tillerson, I like the next one better. Selecting Rex Tillerson for Secretary of State is a strange way to deny that Putin helped you win an election. Of course, that charge has returned frequently. Donald Trump has said absolutely not. And some are, pointing that out. Anyway, Rex Tillerson, good job, Trump. How about El Chapo for drug czar? So it continues. You could spend quite a bit of time with those sort of tweets. Human Rights Watch, being one of the voices expressing concerns in a more concrete manner. They say as Exxon Mobil CEO Tillerson oversaw lucrative business operations in countries with questionable human rights records, such as Equatorial Guinea and Angola, and the company at the time was hostile to US laws requiring greater financial transparency and a strong human rights record or standard. So I guess when he'll be putting on the hat of US Secretary of State, those who are in favour of him will argue that he will have to shift, and he will shift his policy in that regard. And so Human Rights Watch saying Tillerson should clarify how, if nominated, and confirm he will uphold the US international human rights obligations. Yeah, that certainly will be interesting to watch those hearings that'll take place before the Senate. Right. So lots of voices actually saying, well, maybe he's not going to be so bad. You have all of the satirical sort of tweets that I was pointing to there, but many others saying, well, hold on a minute. Anyone complaining that he doesn't have experience should, well, crooked Hillary, that nice Trump refrain that keeps coming back. The many decades of experience of Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, how has that helped us out in terms of foreign policy? That was a frequent argument of Donald Trump during the campaign, that despite his lack of governmental experience, it doesn't mean that the US doesn't have problems in terms of international relations and diplomacy. Elsewhere, just people simply congratulating Rex Tillerson, a lot of messages like that going across social networks as well. And others saying, now watch the left go nuts. So we can see this lovely dynamic of America being completely split in two, continuing with this particular nomination. Obviously, it is divisive to say the least. You shared this article earlier, François, 8 reasons that Exxon's Rex Tillerson could succeed as Secretary of State. It's quite a good, I think, breakdown of the reasons why we
From our guest, Ellen Wald.
Indeed, and just to sum up 2 or 3 of them. His diplomatic experience, he knows world leaders and understands their motivations. As the chief executive of a multi-billion dollar global company, president in 50 countries, he has experience managing a large operation. And they also point out that while he has built a relationship with, for example, Vladimir Putin, that was as a representative of Exxon, and that, of course, he will have to shift now as Secretary of State. So the worries that he was too close to Putin in his previous role, perhaps we shouldn't worry because he will be changing role. That's
All right.
some of the arguments.
Well, we will see. The proof will be in the pudding. Many
Indeed.
thanks, James
Thanks,
Creedon.
François.
I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.